It was 11:47 at night when everything I thought I knew about medicine, and faith, was about to crumble. I had just finished my third cup of coffee, trying to stay alert during what felt like the longest shift of my 12-year career as a pediatrician at Children's Memorial Hospital in Chicago. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting that familiar sterile glow across the empty corridors. I thought it would be just another quiet Tuesday night. I was so wrong. Let me tell you something about being a pediatrician. You learn to build walls, thick, impenetrable walls around your heart. You have to. Because if you don't, the weight of every sick child, every desperate parent, every case you can't save will crush you completely. I had perfected this art over the years. I was Dr. Michael Harrison, the reliable one, the logical one, the one who dealt in facts and science, not hopes and prayers. My faith? Well, that had been buried somewhere deep, probably around my 6th year of practice. Too many nights like this one, too many families I couldn't help, too many questions that God never seemed to answer. I remember telling my wife Sarah that I believed in what I could see under a microscope, what I could measure with instruments, what I could cure with medicine. Everything else was just wishful thinking. The pediatric ICU was unusually calm that night. Only 3 beds occupied, all stable cases. Rebecca Martinez, our night nurse, was updating charts at the central station. She'd been working these halls almost as long as I had, and we'd developed that comfortable professional rhythm you only get after years of shared emergencies. The soft beeping of monitors created a strangely soothing soundtrack. The sound of children breathing, hearts beating, life continuing. I was reviewing lab results for Timothy Chen, a 7-year-old recovering from pneumonia, when I heard it. The sound that every pediatrician dreads, the screech of ambulance tires in the emergency bay below, followed by the urgent intercom crackle. Code blue pediatric, incoming trauma, ETA 2 minutes. My coffee cup hit the counter as I moved toward the elevator. In those 2 minutes, my mind ran through protocols, medications, procedures. This was my domain, the intersection of medical knowledge and split-second decisions. I felt that familiar surge of adrenaline, the same rush I'd experienced thousands of times before. I was ready for whatever was coming through those doors. Or so I thought. The elevator seemed to take forever, each floor marker lighting up with agonizing slowness. Ground floor, emergency department. The doors opened to controlled chaos, the beautiful, terrifying dance of medical professionals preparing for battle. Dr. Lisa Park, our head of emergency medicine, was already suited up. "What do we know?" I asked, pulling on gloves. 8-year-old female Emma Rodriguez, found unresponsive at home. Parents called 911 about 20 minutes ago. Paramedics managed to get a pulse back, but it's weak, blood pressure dropping fast. Lisa's voice was steady, professional, but I caught that slight tension in her eyes. The look that meant this was bad. Really bad. I nodded, my mind already shifting into clinical mode. 8 years old. In pediatrics, every year matters. Every month can change how a child's body responds to trauma, to treatment, to survival itself. I'd seen miracles in my career. Premature babies who shouldn't have made it. Children who recovered from devastating injuries. But I'd also seen the opposite. The cases that haunt you forever. The ambulance lights flashed through the glass doors as they approached, red and blue painting everything in urgent colors. Rebecca appeared beside me, having followed me down from the ICU. "Room 3 is prepped," she said quietly. Room 3. Our trauma bay. State-of-the-art equipment. Everything we needed to fight for a child's life. As I stood there, watching those lights get brighter, something shifted inside me. Maybe it was the coffee, maybe it was the late hour, but I felt different, more aware, like the universe was holding its breath. The usual sounds of the emergency department seemed muffled, distant. Even the fluorescent lights appeared softer somehow. I remember thinking about Emma Rodriguez, a name I didn't know yet, a face I hadn't seen. But she was already becoming part of my story, part of who I would become. In 30 seconds, those doors would open, and her parents would rush in carrying their world, their everything, their reason for breathing. They would look at me with eyes full of desperate hope, believing that I could save their daughter. The thing about being a pediatrician is that parents see you as more than human. They need you to be superhuman. They need you to have powers beyond medicine, beyond science. And for 12 years, I had carried that responsibility on my shoulders, never admitting that sometimes, too many times, I felt completely powerless. The ambulance doors slammed shut outside, footsteps on pavement, radio chatter, the mechanical sound of a gurney being unloaded. My hands were steady, my mind clear, my training kicking in like muscle memory. But somewhere deep inside, in a place I hadn't accessed in years, something was stirring. A whisper of something I used to call prayer. But I had no idea that the night still held something impossible. The emergency department doors burst open with a force that seemed to shake the entire building. 2 paramedics rushed in, wheeling a small gurney between them, their movements precise but urgent. And behind them, God behind them, came the parents. I've seen desperate families before, but nothing quite like Carlos and Maria Rodriguez. Carlos was a big man, probably worked construction based on the calluses I noticed on his hands as he gripped the gurney rail. But right now, he looked smaller than his 8-year-old daughter lying motionless on that stretcher. His face was pale, almost gray, and his lips moved silently. I realized he was praying in Spanish. Maria clung to his arm with one hand, while her other hand never left Emma's forehead, stroking her daughter's dark hair with trembling fingers. "Please, please, you have to save her," Maria whispered, her voice breaking. Her accent was thick, probably first-generation Mexican-American. "She's all we have. She's our everything." The way she said everything, like it contained her entire universe, hit me harder than I expected. I looked down at Emma for the first time, and my clinical training kicked in immediately. 8 years old, about 60 pounds, olive skin that should have been warm and vibrant, but was now an unsettling shade of blue-gray. Her lips were almost purple. Oxygen saturation was dropping fast. The monitors were screaming warnings that made my pulse quicken. This little girl was dying right in front of us. "What happened?" I asked the lead paramedic, Jake Morrison, a guy I'd worked with dozens of times. His usually calm demeanor showed cracks around the edges. "Parents found her collapsed in her bedroom around 11:15. No trauma, no obvious cause. She was conscious when we arrived, asking for her mom, but she went into cardiac arrest in the ambulance." Jake's voice was steady, but I caught him glancing at Emma's parents with that look we all get when a case hits too close to home. "We got her back, but barely. Vitals have been unstable ever since." I nodded, my hands already moving to check Emma's pulse. Weak. Thread. The kind of pulse that feels like it might slip away if you breathe too hard. Her skin was cool to the touch, and when I lifted her eyelid to check pupil response, she seemed so far away, like she was already somewhere else. "Room 3 now," I ordered, and our team sprang into action. Rebecca appeared with a crash cart. "Doctor." Park started barking orders about blood work and imaging, and suddenly we were moving. That controlled chaos that happens when everyone knows exactly what their job is, even when that job feels impossible. As we transferred Emma to the trauma bed, I became acutely aware of her parents hovering just outside the doorway. Hospital policy usually kept families in the waiting room during critical procedures, but something in Maria's eyes stopped me from asking security to escort them out. She looked like a woman watching her world end in real time. "Dr. Harrison," she said, grabbing my arm as I walked past. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "In Mexico, my grandmother always said that God sends angels when children are in danger. Are you our angel?" I paused, struck by the absolute faith in her voice. Here was a woman whose daughter was dying, and she was talking about angels. A year ago, I might have found it naive, maybe even irritating. But tonight, something about her certainty made my chest tighten. "I'm going to do everything I can," I said, which was the truth, even if it felt inadequate. Carlos finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "She wanted to be a doctor like you, always playing with her toy stethoscope, checking her stuffed animals." He pulled out his phone with shaking hands, showing me a photo of Emma in a white coat that was clearly too big for her, grinning at the camera with missing front teeth. "She said she wanted to help sick kids feel better." That photo hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just a patient anymore. This was Emma Rodriguez, who wanted to be a doctor, who played with toy stethoscopes, who had parents who saw angels where I saw only medical equipment and fading hope. Back in the trauma room, we worked with mechanical precision. IV lines, cardiac monitors, blood pressure cuffs designed for tiny arms. Emma's vitals were painting a picture I'd seen too many times before. Multiple organ failure, body shutting down, time running out fast. Her heart rate was erratic, blood pressure barely registering, oxygen levels dropping despite the ventilator we'd connected. "Talk to me about blood work," I called out to the lab tech who'd just rushed in with results. "Nothing conclusive, doctor. No signs of poisoning, no obvious infections. Electrolytes are off, but that could be secondary to whatever's causing this." Sarah Kim, our lab specialist, looked as puzzled as I felt. It's like her body just stopped working. I stood there, staring at the monitors, my mind racing through differential diagnoses. Sudden cardiac arrest in an 8-year-old with no underlying conditions. No trauma. No toxins. No infections. What we had was a mystery wrapped in a medical emergency, and mysteries don't respond well to standard treatment protocols. Through the glass window of the trauma room, I could see Carlos and Maria in the hallway. They were holding each other now, Maria's face buried in her husband's chest, his hand stroking her hair the same way she'd been stroking Emma's. The way they held each other. Like they were each other's only anchor in a storm that was threatening to destroy everything they'd ever known. Rebecca caught my attention. "Doctor, we're losing her." The monitors confirmed what we all feared. Emma's heart rate was becoming more irregular. Her blood pressure was dropping to dangerous levels, and despite everything we were doing, she was slipping away from us. I could feel that familiar weight settling on my shoulders. The weight of a family's hopes. The weight of a life I might not be able to save. And that's when I realized this night was about to teach me something I never expected to learn. "Doctor, her parents want to see her." Rebecca's voice was soft but urgent. They're saying they want to say goodbye." The words hit me like ice water. In 12 years of pediatric medicine, those words never got easier to hear. But when I looked through the glass at Carlos and Maria Rodriguez, I saw something that made my medical training collide head-on with something deeper, something human. Maria was pacing in tight circles, her hands pressed against her mouth as if trying to hold in screams. Every few seconds, she would stop and look toward the trauma room, her eyes wild with a kind of desperation I'd only seen in mothers facing the unthinkable. Carlos stood frozen against the wall, staring at the floor, his big shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "Give me 2 more minutes," I told Rebecca. "Let me try something else first." But even as I said it, I knew we were running out of options. Emma's heart rate had become dangerously irregular, spiking to 160 then dropping to 40, like her little body couldn't decide whether to fight or surrender. Her oxygen levels were critical despite maximum support, and her skin had taken on that waxy pallor that every pediatrician learns to recognize. The color that means time is almost up. I increased the epinephrine drip, adjusted the ventilator settings, checked and rechecked every line and monitor. My hands moved with practiced precision, but my mind kept drifting to that photo Carlos had shown me. Emma in her oversized doctor coat, grinning with those missing teeth, dreaming of helping sick children just like I did. "Dr. Harrison," Dr. Park appeared at my shoulder. "I think you need to prepare them. Her cardiac output is failing, and we've exhausted most of our options. I'm sorry." Lisa Park was one of the best emergency physicians I'd ever worked with. If she was telling me to prepare the family, it meant she'd already run through every possible intervention in her head and come up empty. It meant Emma Rodriguez, who wanted to be a doctor, who played with toy stethoscopes, who was her parents' everything, was going to die on my watch. I stepped out of the trauma room, my legs feeling heavier with each step. Carlos looked up as I approached, and I saw him searching my face for any sign of hope. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. "How is she?" Maria asked, though something in her voice told me she already knew the answer. Mothers always know. I chose my words carefully. "We're doing everything we can, but Emma is very sick. Her body is struggling to respond to our treatments." The clinical language felt inadequate, almost cruel. But how do you tell parents that modern medicine, with all its technology and expertise, might not be enough to save their child? "But she's strong," Carlos said, his voice desperate. "She's always been strong. When she was 5, she had pneumonia, and the doctors said it was bad, but she fought through it. She's a fighter. Yes, I agreed, because it was true. Any child who'd made it this far was definitely a fighter. She is strong, but right now she needs all the strength she can get. Maria stepped closer to me, and I could smell her perfume, something floral and sweet that reminded me of my own mother. Doctor, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you believe in God? The question caught me completely off guard. In all my years of medicine, I'd been asked about prognosis, about treatment options, about statistics and possibilities. But never this. Never something so direct, so personal. I hesitated, thinking about my own journey from faith to skepticism. I believe in doing everything medically possible. That's not what I asked. Her eyes were intense, searching. I asked if you believe in God. Before I could answer, Carlos joined the conversation. Doctor, we know you're doing everything you can with medicine, but sometimes there are things beyond medicine, right? Things that science can't explain? I looked at these parents. Carlos with his work-roughened hands clasped in prayer. Maria with tears streaming down her face but her chin raised in defiance. And I realized they weren't just asking for medical expertise. They were asking for something I'd stopped offering years ago. Hope beyond protocols. Faith beyond pharmaceuticals. I've seen things, I said slowly, that I couldn't fully explain medically. Maria grabbed my hands, her grip surprisingly warm. Then you know that sometimes God works through doctors, sometimes miracles happen in hospitals. Through the glass, I could see Emma lying so still on the trauma bed, surrounded by machines that were doing the work her little body couldn't do anymore. The monitors showed numbers that any pediatrician would recognize as terminal: heart rate erratic, blood pressure dropping, oxygen saturation despite maximum support barely sustaining life. Can we see her? Carlos asked. Can we be with her? Hospital protocol said no. Active resuscitation meant sterile environment, meant medical personnel only, meant keeping families at a safe distance from the controlled chaos of life-saving procedures. But looking at these parents, thinking about Emma's dream of becoming a doctor, remembering that photo of her in the oversized white coat, I found myself nodding. For a few minutes, I said. But you need to understand. We're still working. We're not giving up. We're not giving up either, Maria said firmly. We're going to pray. We're going to ask God to send a miracle. As I led them toward the trauma room, I caught Rebecca's surprised look. This wasn't standard procedure. This wasn't following protocol. But something about this case, about this family, about Emma herself, was making me question everything I thought I knew about medicine, about faith, about what was possible in that space between science and something greater. I had no idea I was about to witness something that would change everything I believed about both. The moment Carlos and Maria entered the trauma room, the atmosphere shifted completely. It was as if the sterile, clinical environment suddenly became charged with something raw and desperate, parental love in its purest, most powerful form. Maria immediately went to Emma's side, her hand finding her daughter's forehead with the practiced touch of a mother who'd soothed countless fevers and nightmares. Mija, Mommy's here, she whispered in Spanish, then English. We're both here, baby girl. You're going to be okay. But Emma wasn't okay. If anything, her condition was deteriorating faster now. The cardiac monitor showed increasingly irregular rhythms, what we call agonal breathing patterns. Her heart was struggling to maintain any consistent rhythm, and despite the maximum dose of vasopressors we were pushing, her blood pressure continued to drop. Carlos stood at the foot of the bed, his massive hands gripping the rail so tightly his knuckles had gone white. She looked so small, he said, his voice breaking. So small in that big bed. He was right. Surrounded by all our medical equipment, the ventilator, the IV pumps, the monitors with their endless wires, 8-year-old Emma looked impossibly fragile. Her dark hair spread across the pillow like a halo, and her face, usually animated with the boundless energy of childhood, was peaceful but unnaturally still. Doctor, Rebecca appeared at my elbow, her voice low and urgent. BP is dropping to 60/30. Heart rate is becoming increasingly irregular. I think she didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. I could read the monitors as well as she could. Emma's body was shutting down, system by system. Her kidneys had stopped producing urine hours ago. Her liver enzymes were skyrocketing. Her brain showed minimal activity on the EEG we'd attached 20 minutes earlier. I stepped closer to the bedside, ostensibly to check her pulse, but really to buy myself a few more seconds to think. Under my fingers, Emma's wrist felt impossibly thin, and her pulse was so weak I had to press firmly just to feel it. Thread, irregular, fading. "Is there anything else?" Carlos asked, hope and desperation warring in his voice. "Any other treatment? Any other hospital we should take her to? We have insurance, we can pay, whatever it costs." I'd heard this before. Parents willing to mortgage their futures, to give everything they had, for just one more chance. The problem was, we'd already tried everything. Advanced cardiac life support protocols, multiple medications to support her heart function, fluid resuscitation, even experimental treatments that weren't typically used in pediatric cases. "Carlos, Maria," I said gently, "we've used every tool in our medical arsenal. Her body isn't responding to treatment the way we'd hope." "What does that mean?" Maria asked, though something in her eyes told me she already knew. I took a deep breath. This was the part of pediatric medicine they don't prepare you for in medical school. The moment when you have to tell parents that science has reached its limits. It means we need to prepare for the possibility that Emma might not, that her body might not be able to recover from this. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Maria's hand never left Emma's forehead, but I saw her shoulders begin to shake. Carlos made a sound that was half sob, half prayer. "How long?" he asked quietly. I glanced at the monitors again. Emma's heart rate was becoming more erratic by the minute. Her oxygen saturation was dropping despite maximum ventilator support. Her blood pressure was barely registering on the machines. "I don't know," I admitted. "Maybe minutes, maybe an hour. But Carlos, Maria, you should know that she's not in pain. The medications we're giving her ensure that she's comfortable." That was when Maria did something that completely caught me off guard. She looked directly at me, tears streaming down her face, and said, "Doctor, will you pray with us?" I froze. In 12 years of practice, no one had ever asked me to pray with them. I'd been asked to explain procedures, to give statistics, to provide hope through medical intervention. But pray? That was territory I'd abandoned long ago. I'm not sure that's appropriate," I started to say. "Please," Carlos interrupted. "We're not asking you to believe what we believe. We're just asking you to stand with us, as a human being, as someone who cares about our daughter." I looked around the trauma room. Rebecca was adjusting IV drips with practiced efficiency. Dr. Park was reviewing charts at the computer terminal. The respiratory therapist was monitoring ventilator settings. Everyone was doing their job, following protocols, practicing medicine the way we'd all been trained. But here were Emma's parents, asking for something beyond medicine, something beyond protocols and procedures. They were asking for presence, for solidarity, for someone to acknowledge that there are moments when human connection might be more powerful than medical intervention. "Okay," I heard myself say. "Yes, I'll stand with you." The three of us formed a small circle beside Emma's bed. Maria kept one hand on her daughter's forehead, while extending the other toward me. Carlos reached out as well, his calloused palm warm and solid in my hand. For a moment, we just stood there, connected by touch and shared concern for this little girl who wanted to be a doctor. "Dear God," Maria began, her voice steady despite her tears. "We know Emma is in your hands. We're asking for a miracle. We're asking you to heal our daughter, to bring her back to us. But if that's not your will, then please help us accept whatever comes with grace." As she spoke, I found myself actually listening, not with the detached professionalism I usually maintain during emotional family moments, but with something deeper. Something that felt almost like hope. "And please bless Dr. Harrison and all the doctors and nurses who are trying to help Emma. Give them wisdom and strength, and help them know that they're doing your work too." That last part hit me unexpectedly hard. I hadn't thought of medicine as God's work in years. But standing there, holding hands with these parents who were facing the unthinkable with such dignity and faith, I felt something shifting inside me. The monitors continued their urgent beeping. Emma's condition continued to deteriorate. But in that moment of prayer, surrounded by the chaos of a pediatric trauma room, something felt different. And then Emma's heart stopped completely. The sound was deafening in its absence. One moment, the cardiac monitor had been beeping erratically, irregular, struggling, but still fighting. The next moment, silence. That flat, continuous tone that every medical professional knows by heart. The sound that means a life has just slipped away. Code blue. Code blue, the monitor announced automatically. But we were already there. We were already doing everything possible. And now, we were watching it all fail. Maria's hand tightened on Emma's forehead. "No, no, no," she whispered. Then louder. "No. Emma, come back to Mommy. Come back, baby girl." Carlos released my hand and moved to his wife's side, his arms encircling both her and his daughter. "She's not gone," he said firmly, though his voice shook. "She's not gone. Emma, you hear me? You fight, Mija. You fight!" I immediately started chest compressions, my hands positioned carefully on Emma's small sternum. The training kicked in automatically. 30 compressions, 2 breaths, repeat. But even as my hands worked mechanically, my mind was calculating the odds. 8-year-old in full cardiac arrest. No response to maximum medical intervention. How long had it been since she'd had adequate perfusion? Too long. "Push another round of epi," I called to Rebecca, who was already drawing up the medication. "And get me the crash cart." The room exploded into controlled chaos again. Dr. Park appeared with additional staff, respiratory therapy, adjusted ventilator settings. Everyone moved with precision born of training and experience, but I could see it in their eyes. The same resignation I felt building in my chest. After 12 years, you develop a sense about these things. You learn to read the subtle signs that tell you when a case has crossed that invisible line from possible to impossible. Emma had crossed that line 20 minutes ago, and we'd all known it. We'd just been too professional, too hopeful, too human to acknowledge it. "Come on, Emma," I muttered under my breath as I continued compressions. "Come on, sweetheart. Stay with us." But the monitor remained flat. No electrical activity, no spontaneous heartbeat, nothing. 5 minutes passed, 10. In pediatric resuscitation, every minute decreases the chance of meaningful recovery. After 10 minutes without circulation, even if we got her back, the likelihood of severe brain damage was overwhelming. "Dr. Harrison," Rebecca said quietly, "it's been 15 minutes." I knew what she was suggesting. 15 minutes was typically when we started having conversations about futility, about the point where continued resuscitation becomes more about the family's need than the patient's benefit. But looking at Carlos and Maria, seeing the fierce determination in their eyes, hearing Maria's whispered prayers in Spanish mixing with her urgent pleas in English, I couldn't bring myself to stop. "Another round," I said. "Push more epi." That's when Maria did something I will remember for the rest of my life. She stepped back from Emma's bedside, dropped to her knees on the cold hospital floor, and began to pray with an intensity that seemed to fill the entire room. "Dios mío, I know my daughter is in your hands," she said, her voice rising above the medical chaos around us. "I know you can do anything. I've seen your miracles before. My grandmother saw your miracles. Please, God, please don't take my baby. Please bring her back to us." Her faith was so raw, so absolute, that it cut through every cynical defense I'd built up over the years. Here was a woman whose world was ending, and instead of cursing God or demanding explanations, she was surrendering everything to him with complete trust. Carlos knelt beside his wife, his big hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. "God, if you're listening," he said, "we're not asking why this happened. We're just asking for a miracle. We're asking you to show us that you're real, that you care about little girls who want to be doctors." 20 minutes. The flat line on the monitor hadn't wavered once. No electrical activity, no response to medications, No spontaneous breathing. By every medical standard I'd been trained to follow, Emma Rodriguez was gone. But something about her parents' prayers, about their unshakable faith in the face of the impossible, made me keep going. Maybe it was their certainty. Maybe it was the memory of Emma in that oversized white coat. Maybe it was something I couldn't name, something that felt almost like hope. "Another round," I called out, though I could see the questions in my colleague's eyes. "How long do you continue when there's no medical justification? When does hope become denial?" Maria's prayers grew more intense. "Please, God. I promise if you save her, she'll use her life to help others. She wants to be a doctor, to heal people like Dr. Harrison does. Please give her that chance." As she spoke these words, something extraordinary began to happen. It started as the faintest blip on the cardiac monitor, so small that at first I thought it might be an artifact, interference from one of the other machines. But then it happened again, a tiny electrical impulse, then another. "Wait," I said, my hands pausing mid-compression. "Everyone stop. Look at the monitor." The room went completely silent except for the ventilator's rhythmic whoosh. We all stared at the screen that had shown nothing but a flat line for 22 minutes. Blip. "Is that?" Rebecca started to ask. "Cardiac rhythm," I whispered, hardly believing what I was seeing. "She's got a rhythm." The blips became more regular, stronger. And then, impossibly, beautifully, the monitor began showing what every doctor dreams of seeing, a steady, strong, normal sinus rhythm. Maria was still on her knees, still praying, when I checked Emma's pulse. It was there. Weak at first, but definitely there. Real, steady, getting stronger by the second. "Blood pressure is coming up," Rebecca announced, her voice filled with disbelief. 60 over 40, now 70 over 50, 80 over 55. I stared at the monitors, then at Emma, then at her parents who were still kneeling in prayer. In 12 years of medicine, I had never seen anything like this. Spontaneous return of circulation after 22 minutes of asystole in a pediatric patient was medically impossible. But what happened next would shake me even more deeply. Emma's eyes opened. Not slowly, not gradually like patients usually do when emerging from unconsciousness. Her eyes simply opened, clear and focused, as if she had been taking a peaceful nap and was now ready to wake up. She blinked once, twice, then turned her head toward the sound of her mother's voice. "Mommy?" she whispered, her voice hoarse from the ventilator tube we'd removed moments earlier, but unmistakably alert. "Why are you crying?" I stood frozen beside her bed, my hand still positioned where I'd been doing chest compressions, staring at a child who had been clinically gone for 22 minutes. 22 minutes without a heartbeat. 22 minutes without circulation to her brain. 22 minutes during which, according to every medical textbook I'd ever studied, irreversible brain damage should have occurred. But here she was, asking why her mother was crying. Maria sobbed as she threw her arms around Emma, careful not to disturb the remaining IV lines. "Oh baby, oh my baby girl, you're okay. You're okay." "I'm okay, Mommy," Emma said, sounding confused but completely coherent. "But I had the strangest dream. There was this beautiful lady and she said I couldn't come with her yet because I still had work to do here. She said I was going to help lots of people someday." The room went completely silent except for the steady beeping of Emma's heart monitor, a sound that 30 minutes ago had been nothing but a flat line, and now was broadcasting a strong, regular rhythm that would have been normal for any healthy 8-year-old. I checked her pupils with my penlight. Equal and reactive. Normal. I tested her grip strength. Normal. I asked her to follow my finger with her eyes. Perfect tracking. Basic neurological function appeared to be completely intact. "Emma," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Do you know where you are?" "I'm in the hospital," she said matter-of-factly. "Are you Dr. Harrison? Mommy and Daddy were talking about you. They said you were trying to help me get better." "That's right," I managed to say. "How do you feel?" She considered this question seriously, like 8-year-olds do when adults ask them something important. "Tired, and my chest hurts a little. But mostly I feel different. Like something important happened, but I can't remember what." Carlos had joined his wife at Emma's bedside, tears streaming down his face as he stroked his daughter's hair. "We're here, mija. Everything's going to be okay now." I stepped back from the bed, my legs suddenly unsteady. Rebecca caught my arm. "Doctor, are you all right?" Was I all right? I had just witnessed something that violated everything I understood about medicine, about biology, about the limits of human survival. A child had returned from clinical death with no apparent neurological deficits, no organ damage, no complications whatsoever. "I need to run some tests," I said, more to convince myself than anyone else. "CT scan, MRI, comprehensive metabolic panel. We need to understand what happened here." But even as I spoke, I knew that no test would explain what I had just witnessed. Medical science might tell us about Emma's current condition, which appeared to be remarkably normal. But it would never explain how she had survived 22 minutes without circulation and emerged neurologically intact. Dr. Park appeared at my side, her expression a mixture of amazement and professional confusion. "Michael, I've been practicing emergency medicine for 15 years. I've never seen anything like this. The timeline, the recovery, the complete absence of expected complications. It's unprecedented." "Unprecedented," I repeated, the word feeling inadequate to describe what we'd experienced. "Lisa, she was gone. Completely gone. No electrical activity, no pulse, no blood pressure for over 20 minutes. I know. I was here. I witnessed the same thing you did." She paused, studying Emma, who was now sitting up in bed chatting quietly with her parents. "How do we even document this in her medical record?" That was the question, wasn't it? How do you write a clinical note that says, "Patient experienced 22 minutes of asystole, then spontaneously resumed normal cardiac function following parental prayer, with complete neurological recovery"? What diagnosis code covers miraculous healing? I walked back to Emma's bedside. She looked up at me with bright, curious eyes. The same eyes that had been fixed and dilated an hour ago, showing no response to light. "Dr. Harrison," she said, "my mom told me I want to be a doctor like you when I grow up. Is that right?" "That's what your dad told me," I confirmed. "You like helping people feel better?" "Yes," she said with the earnest certainty that only children possess. "I think helping sick people is the most important thing you can do. Don't you?" Standing there, looking at this little girl who had been clinically dead 30 minutes earlier, I found myself reconsidering everything I thought I knew about healing, about medicine, about what was possible when science reached its limits. "Yes, Emma," I said quietly. "I think helping people is exactly what we're supposed to do." Maria looked up at me, her eyes still wet with tears, but now shining with something that looked like gratitude mixed with awe. "Doctor, do you believe now? Do you believe in miracles?" I thought about my answer carefully. 3 hours ago, I would have deflected the question, talked about unexplained medical phenomena, referenced cases in the literature of unusual recoveries. I would have hidden behind scientific uncertainty, rather than acknowledge the possibility of something beyond medical explanation. But standing in that trauma room, surrounded by machines that had recorded the impossible, looking at a child who should not have survived, I found myself unable to retreat into comfortable skepticism. "Maria," I said, "I believe I just witnessed something that medicine cannot explain, and I believe that sometimes in the space between what we know and what we don't know, extraordinary things can happen." She smiled through her tears. "That's all faith is, doctor. Believing in extraordinary things." As I left the trauma room to begin the complex process of documenting the undocumentable, I realized that something fundamental had shifted inside me. The walls I'd built around my heart, the skepticism I'd worn like armor against the disappointments of medicine, had developed cracks that I wasn't sure could ever be repaired. And I wasn't sure I wanted them to be. The next few hours passed in a blur of medical tests, consultations, and what I can only describe as controlled amazement. Emma's CT scan showed no signs of brain damage. Her MRI was completely normal. Blood work revealed no abnormalities. Every single test we ran suggested that she was a perfectly healthy 8-year-old girl who had never experienced a 22-minute cardiac arrest. But it was the moments between the tests that will stay with me forever. I was reviewing Emma's lab results in the quiet of the pediatric ICU when I heard laughter coming from her room. Not the polite, careful laughter of people trying to stay positive in a hospital setting, but genuine, joyful laughter. The kind that makes you smile even when you don't know what's funny. I walked to her doorway and saw Emma sitting cross-legged on her hospital bed, still connected to monitoring equipment, playing some kind of hand-clapping game with her mother. Carlos sat in the chair beside the bed, recording everything on his phone, his face beaming with a happiness so profound it was almost painful to witness. "Dr. Harrison," Emma called out when she saw me. "Look what Mommy taught me." She demonstrated an intricate pattern of claps and finger snaps that seemed impossibly complex for someone who had been unconscious 2 hours earlier. "That's very impressive," I said, and meant it. Her fine motor coordination was perfect. Her cognitive function appeared completely normal. According to every medical principle I understood, this should not have been possible. Rebecca joined me in the doorway. "Doctor, I've been working pediatric ICU for 8 years," she said quietly. "I've seen children recover from things that should have ended their lives, but I've never seen anything like this." "What are people saying?" I asked. "The other staff, I mean." She glanced around to make sure we weren't overheard. "They're calling it the miracle in room 3. Dr. Park has been fielding calls from other physicians asking about the case. Word is spreading through the hospital." That didn't surprise me. In a place where medical professionals dealt with life and death every day, something like Emma's recovery would inevitably become legendary. Stories like this got passed down through generations of doctors and nurses, growing with each telling until they became part of hospital folklore. But I had been there. I had seen it happen. I had felt for Emma's pulse when there was none, had watched her heart rhythm flatline for 22 minutes, had performed chest compressions on a child whose body showed every sign of irreversible shutdown. This wasn't folklore. This was something I would carry with me for the rest of my career. "Dr. Harrison," a voice behind me said. I turned to see Dr. James Crawford, our chief of pediatrics, approaching with what looked like a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. "I understand we had an unusual case tonight." "That's one way to put it," I replied. "I've been reviewing the monitors, the timeline, the documentation." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I'm having trouble reconciling the recorded data with the patient's current condition." Dr. Crawford was a good physician and a fair administrator, but he was also someone who believed firmly in medical explanations for medical phenomena. The idea that something might exist beyond the boundaries of science made him visibly uncomfortable. "The data is accurate," I said. "Emma Rodriguez experienced 22 minutes of asystole with no detectable cardiac output. Her recovery was spontaneous and complete." "And you're certain about the timeline? 22 minutes is—" "Well, it's incompatible with neurological survival. I'm certain." He nodded slowly, but I could see the skepticism in his eyes. "I'm going to need a comprehensive report, and I think we should consider consulting with cardiology, neurology, maybe even having her transferred to a research hospital for additional study." Before I could respond, Emma's voice carried from her room. "Daddy, tell me again about when I was little and wanted to be a doctor." Carlos's voice was warm with affection. "You were 3 years old, mija, and you found my stethoscope in my work bag. You put it on and announced that you were going to make all the sick people better. You said doctors were angels who helped God heal people." "Angels who help God heal people," Emma repeated thoughtfully. "I like that. Is that what Dr. Harrison is? An angel?" I felt my throat tighten. In 12 years of medicine, I'd been called many things by patients and families. Brilliant, dedicated, lifesaver, but never an angel. And certainly never in the context of helping God heal people. "Dr. Harrison is a very good doctor," Maria said diplomatically. "He worked very hard to help you get better." "But God helped too, right?" Emma asked. "That's what the beautiful lady in my dream said. She said God works through doctors' hands sometimes." Dr. Crawford raised an eyebrow. "The patient is experiencing religious hallucinations?" "No," I said quickly. "She mentioned having a dream during her unconscious period. It's not uncommon for patients to report dreamlike experiences during medical emergencies." But even as I said it, I wondered if that explanation was adequate. Emma's description of her dream, was remarkably consistent with near-death experiences reported by other patients. The presence of a benevolent figure, the message about having more work to do, the sense of being given a choice about returning. "I want to see her," Dr. Crawford said. We entered Emma's room together. She looked up at us with bright, curious eyes, showing no sign of the trauma she'd endured just hours earlier. "Hello," she said politely. "Are you another doctor?" "I am," Dr. Crawford replied. "I'm Dr. Crawford. How are you feeling, Emma?" "I feel good. A little tired, but good. Dr. Harrison took really good care of me." She paused, then added with the innocent directness of childhood, "Do you believe in miracles, Dr. Crawford?" The question caught him completely off guard. I watched as this man, who had spent his entire career relying on scientific evidence and medical protocols, struggled to find an appropriate response to an 8-year-old's simple question. "I believe in medicine," he said finally. Emma nodded seriously. "That's good. But sometimes medicine and miracles work together, don't they? Like, God gives doctors smart brains and steady hands, and then sometimes he does the extra special part that doctors can't do by themselves." The room fell silent. Out of the mouths of babes, as they say. This child, who had experienced something that defied medical explanation, was offering a perspective that somehow made perfect sense, the idea that divine intervention and human skill might not be opposing forces, but complementary ones. Dr. Crawford cleared his throat. "Well, Emma, I'm very glad you're feeling better. You rest now, and we'll take good care of you." As we left her room, he walked beside me in thoughtful silence. Finally, he spoke. "In 40 years of practice, I've learned that medicine is both an art and a science. But tonight, I'm wondering if there might be a third component I hadn't considered." The profound implications of what we had witnessed were beginning to sink in for all of us. 3 days later, Emma Rodriguez walked out of Children's Memorial Hospital, holding her parents' hands, carrying a stuffed bear that the nursing staff had given her, and wearing the biggest smile I'd ever seen. Her discharge papers showed normal vital signs, normal neurological function, and a completely healthy heart. Medically speaking, there was no evidence that she had ever been critically ill. But I knew better. We all knew better. I was finishing my notes in the physician's lounge when Carlos and Maria appeared in the doorway. They looked different now. Not the desperate, grief-stricken parents I had met 3 nights earlier, but people who had witnessed something extraordinary and were still processing what it meant. "Dr. Harrison," Maria said, "we wanted to thank you before we left." "You don't need to thank me," I replied. "I'm just grateful Emma is okay." Carlos stepped forward and extended his hand. "Doctor, I know you're a man of science. I know this whole experience probably challenges everything you've been taught to believe. But I want you to know something." I shook his hand, struck again by the calloused strength of his grip, the hands of a man who worked hard to provide for his family, who had knelt on a hospital floor and prayed for a miracle. "What we witnessed in that room wasn't just about Emma getting better," he continued. "It was about all of us learning something important. About faith and medicine working together, about the fact that healing comes in many forms." Maria nodded. "Emma told us something this morning that I think you should know. She said she dreamed about being a doctor again last night, but this time, she was working alongside an angel. And the angel looked just like you." I felt that familiar tightening in my throat. "Maria, I'm not an angel. I'm just a doctor who stood with us when we needed someone to stand with us," she interrupted gently. "Who prayed with us when we asked, even though it wasn't comfortable for you. Who kept fighting for Emma even when medical science said there was no point. They were right about that. I had continued chest compressions long past the point where protocol would have suggested stopping. I had pushed medications when the textbooks said they were futile. I had kept fighting because something, call it hope, call it faith, call it stubborn refusal to give up, had told me not to stop." "Where will you go from here?" I asked. "Home," Carlos said simply. "Back to our regular life. But it won't be the same regular life, will it? How do you go back to normal after experiencing a miracle?" It was a question I'd been asking myself for 3 days. How do you return to routine medical practice after witnessing something that challenges the very foundations of what you thought you knew about healing, about life, about the limits of human possibility? After they left, I sat alone in the lounge, thinking about the journey I'd taken over the past 3 days. 3 days ago, I had been Dr. Michael Harrison, the logical one, the one who believed only in what could be measured and documented. I had built my career on scientific evidence, clinical protocols, and rational thinking. But now, I found myself questioning not the value of science and medicine. They remained crucial, life-saving tools, but the assumption that they represented the complete picture of healing. Emma's recovery had shown me that there might be dimensions to health and healing that extended beyond what we could quantify in a laboratory. I thought about my conversation with Sarah, my wife, the morning after Emma's recovery. She had listened quietly as I described what had happened, then asked a simple question. How does this change you? How did it change me? I was still a pediatrician. I still believed in the power of modern medicine, in the importance of rigorous training and evidence-based treatment. But something had been added to my understanding, a recognition that the practice of medicine might be enhanced, not diminished, by acknowledging that healing can occur in ways we don't fully comprehend. I remembered Emma's words about doctors being angels who help God heal people. Maybe she was onto something. Maybe the highest calling of medicine wasn't just about applying scientific knowledge, but about serving as instruments of healing in whatever form it chose to manifest. 2 weeks later, I received a hand-drawn card in the mail. The outside showed a stick figure in a white coat with a stethoscope standing next to a hospital bed. Inside, in the careful handwriting of an 8-year-old, it read, "Dear Dr. Harrison, thank you for taking care of me. I still want to be a doctor like you someday. But now I know that the best doctors are the ones who believe in both medicine and miracles. Love, Emma. P.S. Mommy says you have angel hands." I kept that card on my desk, and it became a daily reminder of the night that changed everything I thought I knew about faith, about medicine, about the mysterious ways that healing enters our world. 6 months later, I was invited to speak at a medical conference about unusual pediatric recoveries. As I stood at the podium, looking out at hundreds of physicians, I realized that I had a choice. I could present Emma's case in purely clinical terms, focusing on the medical anomalies and unexplained physiological responses, or I could tell the complete truth, including the parts that couldn't be easily categorized or explained. I chose truth. What I witnessed that night, I told my colleagues, challenged me to expand my understanding of what it means to be a healer. Medicine is powerful, essential, life-saving. But sometimes, in the space between what we know and what we don't know, between what we can control and what we cannot, extraordinary things happen. And when they do, our job isn't to explain them away, but to remain open to the possibility that healing comes in many forms. Today, 12 years later, I still practice pediatric medicine with the same commitment to scientific excellence that has always guided my career. But I also practice with something I had lost along the way and found again in a trauma room at 11:47 on a Tuesday night. A sense of wonder, a recognition that the art of healing encompasses both the miracles of modern medicine and the miracles that transcend medical explanation. Emma Rodriguez did become a doctor, by the way. Dr. Emma Rodriguez graduated from medical school last year and is beginning her residency in pediatrics. And yes, she still believes that the best doctors are the ones who understand that medicine and miracles can work hand in hand. Sometimes faith and science aren't opposing forces. They're partners in the most important work any of us can do. The work of healing. The work of hope. The work of never giving up, even when all the evidence suggests we should. Because sometimes, just sometimes, love finds a way to transcend every limitation we thought was absolute. And when it does, those of us privileged to witness it are forever changed.